Well, welcome, Sharon. Uh, Thank you for joining in this discussion
Thank
about
you, Ray.
relationship management. Obviously, as most people know, you are a well-known author in the subject, many articles and books, and including the latest one, Supplier Selection and Relationship Management, which I hear is doing very well in the market. So you come to this discussion with a lot of experience and a very sound track record, which is why you're part of the team and why we invited you to this. So we hear a lot about supplier relationship management,
Mm.
how important it is, and how it should be conducted. So could you give us an entree into that?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Ray, for giving me the time to talk about it. World Commerce and Contracting often say that supply markets are becoming much more complex. And when we think about some of the effects of some of the geopolitical sort of impacts that we've had over the last 4 or 5 years, we've had COVID, we've had Brexit, we've got the various conflicts going on around the world. You can see how having higher value, strategic value relationships linked to a business's success are vitally important. We're seeing a change as well to the approach from what used to be global supply chains to becoming more localized because of those geopolitical impacts. So it's really about understanding what you need to do better to leverage better value out of your suppliers rather than staying with the same old approach that isn't getting you that value for money from your supply chain.
Do do you think that suppliers, when they do have a good relationship or the relationship is well managed, that come shortages, as we've seen in the supply chain, that those clients get priority, or do contractors just follow the money? Whoever's prepared to pay them the most, they'll supply. I mean, what's your experience?
A very good question. And I think the relationship has a lot to do with that. Clearly, those who do not have good relationships with their customers will probably just follow the money because they're going to sell those goods and services wherever they can make that buck cheapest.
Yeah.
Think about the PPE supplies back in COVID. People were having to outbid each other to get those supplies. However, if a business becomes a customer of choice and they leverage that relationship and work better together with their suppliers, then that supplier is going to work better with that customer to ensure that that customer does get that strategic advantage that they have anticipated getting through having that relationship with that supplier.
That's the point that World CC make is
Yeah,
uh, that often the kind of soft benefits of a good relationship, like innovation, flexibility, responsiveness, often outweigh the simple lowest price.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of people just think, oh, supplier relationship management is a very transactional approach to, sort of managing suppliers. I would say that's just supplier management. It's the relationship side of things that is really important. And this is where the soft skills come in, which don't come naturally to a lot of people. So you have to think about the culture of the organizations. Is there a match in the culture that you're thinking about? And that can be from an organizational level to a geographic level to a team level, even. You also have to think about the ethics. So working together with a company that has the same moral approach to things as well is part of those soft skills generation, and working to forge the right culture together to handle collaboration and handle change between you is a really, really important part of that, which is why the relationship part of this phrase, supply relationship management, is so important.
Absolutely. I mean, my own experience, you often find technical people, engineers and such, don't seem to understand the need to manage the relationship. They say things like, "Well, we're paying them; they just get on and do it," and they don't seem to understand that it's more nuanced than that. There are other ways of getting more value out of the supplier by simply just saying, "Well, I'm paying you; please get on and do it." So that's
Yeah,
we've come
yeah.
across a lot of that over the years.
Yes, definitely, and I hear it as well when I'm sort of conversing with various people, whether they're in public sector or private sector. Again, that whole emphasis of when things go wrong, in particular, it's the relationship that very much ultimately sorts things out. And I've seen examples where the contract is working despite the relationship, but also the contract is working because of the
Yeah,
relationship.
absolutely. Yeah, that's my experience as well. Absolutely. I mean, we've got various models and assessments that we use evaluate the nature of the relationship. I mean, they're fairly simple apps, web apps, but I mean, the questions we often ask are things like, are both sides sharing information? Are both sides candid? Are both minds getting something out of this? Are both sides treated with respect? They're all obvious questions, but collectively they come up with this overall score. And often the people we talk to about that, they're amazed at that how the supplier does not see them as their best friend, does not see them as a prime customer, but in fact quite difficult to deal with because of the relationship aspects. It's quite an interesting study when you do both sides and ask them the same question. Sometimes they're quite distinctly different responses.
Definitely. And I think that's because there's often a lot of myth around SRM. You know, people think that, well, you know, I've got a collaborative relationship, therefore I don't need a contract. Or, well, you know, I've got a good contract and that always stays in the drawer. There's often this perception as well that, well, just because we ran a competition, we'll get value for money. Well, not always. And again, just because we have a contract, we therefore have a relationship and therefore everything's okay. And it's not necessarily the fact that you have to put in extra effort to develop an SRM program to get the best out of that relationship overall.
Well, I think that's as I mentioned previously about engineering companies sometimes fall into that trap, and also I think it's very important that that we look at some of the poor practices in your experience and what I mean. You and I have both done consultancy work, but you're our expert on SRM. Can you share a few? Without naming names, can you?
Without naming names, oh yes, I can certainly go in.
Things could have been done better, perhaps.
Yeah, definitely. You know, sort of, I can probably give a couple of examples where, you know, things have gone wrong during the contract. Let's say that, you know, there's been a burst drain on a site where there's a building that's about to be opened, for example, but the contract was written in a way that it didn't deal with those kinds of issues. So, you know, the sort of client that I was working with had to work out, well, how can I resolve this? I need to sort of deal with the sewerage outflow, which was actually the outcome that was occurring in that instance. I've got to deal with that, but how do I resolve that issue? And because the contract said what it said, and there was no good relationship between the client and the supplier simply said, well, that's what the contract says, and walked away from the problem. So there had to be a real turning around of the relationship to try and get them to help resolve that particular situation. And that meant talking to somebody else who had a relationship with somebody else who had a relationship, and go round that particular supplier to influence them. So that again, it's that myth about saying, well, just because we've got a contract means we've got a good relationship. Not at all. On the flip side of that, I've seen examples where things have gone absolutely fantastically well, because although the contract did say certain things and didn't include certain things, it was the relationship that the two parties had that made that resolution of that issue so much smoother.
They become more pragmatic.
Yes, definitely.
There, but we need it, then we'll do it and you pay us, and you know, these things can be resolved fairly easily.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. Also, I think if people have bid for work and they've come in, so if you don't know the history, if they've been selected on the lowest price, squeeze their margins, when you start to say, well, we want you to be flexible and responsive, they're likely to say, well, you know, no, that's not what you get when you push us down to the wire. Then you're not going to be responsive and flexible and innovative. I guess that would be my thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. And it goes from that move from between just coordinating things. So from an SRM perspective, you have to become aware that all the activities in a business affect suppliers, and suppliers affect everything in our business. And it's moving from that perception of, well, I just need to coordinate what's going on, to being more collaborative and thinking about how can we work jointly together to get the best out of whatever we're trying to achieve, whether that's a delivery of a contract or an expansion of our market, whatever that is likely to contain.
I think it's the emphasis on mutuality, isn't it? If there's a lot of mutuality, if both sides are benefiting in some way equally, then I think the relationship can follow. But if there's a disconnect, if one side feels they're not getting good value or the other side feels they're being exploited, then it's very difficult to build a relationship on that basis.
Yeah, it is. And this is where, you know, again, companies who think they do SRM may not do so because they might not have that joint vision or that joint mission statement between the two parties. and then not introducing things like strategic goals and what value you're going to get out of that relationship. They just seem to think that it's two separate organizations that just happen to work alongside each other without pulling those two emphases together.
Yeah, and also I guess there's a case for targeting these resources, in the sense that there's no point in having a deep relationship with the guys who cut the grass or wash the windows. You would want a relationship with your strategic partners.
Yeah, that's right. And this is where, going back to basics, thinking about your standard project matrix, and working out who your key suppliers are and who your routine suppliers are, and then leveraging what you're going to get out of those strategic suppliers, because it's a two-way activity. Any contract is a two-way activity between any two partners. So the suppliers have got to be involved as well, particularly when it's in that strategic space.
Yeah, absolutely. I've come across situations where companies have spent a lot of time and effort managing the relationship with routine suppliers.
Mm.
We had one example where this company was cutting the grass, literally, for a big local authority. And then when I went there, they said, we have endless meetings with these people. We try and build a relationship. They're difficult to deal with. And I said, well, terminate the contract and find somebody else.
Mm.
Like gasps of horror. So, well, if they're not performing and not prepared to relate to you, and you've tried to put effort into building a relationship, then maybe, given it's a routine activity, then find someone else to cut the grass.
Definitely.
But it's a cultural thing, as you say. There's always
It is.
out, and maybe because it's local government, but it was. Whereas in the private sector, I suspect they would say, "Yeah, we're going to terminate their contract and get somebody better." But again, it's a condition, the preamble, isn't it? Which is very important.
It is. Yeah, it is. And again, it's not understanding your own supply chain and who those strategic suppliers are and who you should spend less effort on and more effort on. And it should always be on those that are in the strategic space.
Well, on that note, I think we'll finish. And
Thank you, Ray.
I'll just go on to the. Okay. Yes. Well, thank you very much. That was really interesting, Sharon. Really informative. If anybody out there's interested in finding more information about the topic, or information about the courses that we run, which are both virtual and face-to-face, both public enrollment and also in-house. And Sharon is our prime deliverer. So if you do pick any, you'll be seeing Sharon again. Okay. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ray.